Listeners, we are back with Kristian for part 4, and we are going to continue talking about questions in the Bible. Kristian, I want to start off today. You know, a lot of this in a recent lunch that we had, I asked you flat out, does the Bible have a marketing problem? And we talked about all these wild stories and all these things that could be out of a feature film. And, you know, the Bible, on one hand, has outsold every other book in history, although it's had years, but yet most people don't read it, right? They're sitting around and they're not being read a lot. And we talked about all these contradictions and war, adultery, and I mean, on and on and on, right? So I think there's a marketing problem. I think, you know, and I'll tell you, this podcast will get great ratings. Like our episodes with you, where we talk about this weird stuff from the Bible and all this stuff, get very good ratings. And I got to believe if we talked about the normal going to Christian or going to church and singing hymns and, you know, the things that are generally promoted in church, obviously very popular. I mean, billions of people around the world, or however many, do this. But I think it would be even more popular if they leaned into some of the things that, you know. So what do you think?
Yeah.
Is there a marketing problem?
Yeah, I mean, yes. The short answer is yes. Like it is so fascinating, and you see it in these movies when people start making them, whether it's The Chosen that came out not too long ago, or the series about David, or I mean, those things do really, really well. You do have to be careful, and there are Christians who are very leery of any type of marketing when it comes to these things, because then it becomes like it maybe it's more true, or it seems more true if enough people watch it, or now you're making money on things, those kinds of things. But I do agree with you. I think in general we don't do a very good job messaging, is maybe another way to say it, to more sensitive ears where marketing might sound too businesslike. We don't do a great job sharing it. You know, there's if you guys know Penn and Teller, who are there in Las Vegas, I think, with their magic shows, and I don't think either one of them are Christian, or they're probably don't believe in anything. But reading a book, one of them said that there was a quote in the book about it, and it said, here, I think I found it. It said, I always said that I don't respect people who don't proselytize. So proselytize is kind of a bad word, of course, like it's kind of like Bible bashing. But when it comes to just, if you just said marketing for religion, he says, I don't respect that at all. If you believe that there's a heaven and a hell, and people who could be going to hell are not getting eternal life, and you think it's not really worth telling them this because it could make them socially awkward, how much do you have to hate somebody to believe everlasting life is possible and not tell them that?
Wow.
Like, dang, that's rough. But he's like, you're just not being logical. You actually believe this and you won't tell people? It doesn't make any sense. You know, now I don't know about, you know, if you go to 6th Street, you probably won't find too many people who want to listen to you, but maybe you will. And I actually heard today of some people who do that and just, hey, here's our card. If you want to talk about Jesus, come let us know. So certainly there is a marketing problem in the broad sense of just like people are so afraid to talk about this stuff. You know, here we're doing it on a podcast live, and yeah, we talk about this stuff over lunch sometimes, but people are just afraid to share what they believe, and we've got kind of this like we shouldn't do it. What is it? You shouldn't talk about politics, religion, or basically anything interesting. And maybe that's just part of our societal ills of today, is like we're just trying to be so accepting and so nice to everybody that you don't want to make anybody feel bad. And it's like, but then we're not having good debate. We're not having good conversations. So, you know, I've to be able to enter into these, I've had to get past my black and white thinking and be able to listen to other people's perspective. I wasn't very good at that in the past. I've gotten much better at that.
You're amazing at that. Let's be honest. You're
Well,
amazing.
thank you. I mean, it's more fun by the way, too. It's like it's really boring after a while being all in black and white. But
Randy, are you, when you say a marketing problem, you talking about a marketing problem for the Bible or for, in this case, Christianity or whatnot? Because the Bible is still the best-selling book,
Right.
you know, across the globe every year. And in the United States last year, Bible sales were up 12%. And then there's also anecdotal evidence and discussion about an increase in attendance at various Christian gatherings, I'll call them, call it church, call it whatever you want to call it. So um,
Yeah,
Kind of curious what you meant by that.
I think I really like what Christian said about messaging. I think messaging is better than the words I used, marketing, right? And I'm just thinking, Anthony, I grew up in a church where, to Christian's point with his kids last episode, it was boring, right? And it just talked it like if it would have talked about some of these things and been like, well, over here the Bible says thou shalt not kill, but over here it's talking about war and all these different things, and we would have had I would have found that fascinating even as a kid. I find that fascinating now, right? When I start talking about it. So I think the way that it was marketed or messaged, to Christian's word, at least to me, generally speaking, is boring. And I think that's true to a lot of people, right? And I think getting into some of these things and some of the philosophy and really thinking about it, to me, is much more effective. And I look at this, one of the things I put in my notes for this is that I think they're scared of the flaws. And I think back, the church that I grew up in, any pastor that I ever had, if I would have been doing my own research, which I certainly wasn't, and asking these types of questions and go, well, you say thou shalt not kill, but David killed and Saul killed and blah, blah, blah. All these people killed and they did these wars and they did these genocides and on and on and on. I would have got the stink eye, right? Like that would have gone over about like a fart in church, right? And I think this is similar to salespeople. You know, I've been training salespeople for years, and one of my huge pet peeves is that if there's any flaw or anything bad, salespeople try to hide it. And they're like, everything's the best and it's the greatest. And it's the opposite. Like, look at Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, one of the things he does, if you look at his shareholder letters every year, he almost always starts with, here's what we did wrong last year. Or here's where we made mistakes last year. And then what that does is the next thing you say has so much more credibility and believability and makes you relatable, and it makes you more trustworthy, right? Like leaning into what's wrong actually helps you sell. And my guess is it's that, and that's the same reason salespeople have problems with it is the same reason a priest or a minister or just general people in the congregation that are, proselytizing. So, does that answer your
I
question?
agree. Yeah, I agree. I mean, Anthony, I'll give you some examples, but Anthony, what's your take before I do?
No, I'm hearing what he's saying, and I guess when you mentioned Warren Buffett, and I went to Charlie Munger, and I was going to ask Christian about incentives and about what are the incentives of today's pastors in in Christian churches. I mean, it doesn't really matter Christian or Judaism, Jewish temples, and what have you. What are the incentives of the leaders of those religions
Mm.
today in today's world? Muslims, and
Yeah, yeah,
maybe they're
yeah.
different, maybe they're the same. Because as he said, you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think in general, your Protestant preachers today, they're generally speaking, their incentive is to do well for sure. But they are in a more competitive environment because generally it's their board of elders that hires and fires the pastor. And so if they're preaching well, they stay and grow. And if they're not preaching well, they get let go pretty quickly. So there's much more competition to be a better preacher. And I think that involves those elements you're talking about. If it's boring, if people aren't coming, if you're not talking about the hard stuff, people tune out. Andy Stanley is probably one of the best in the country today. He's out in Atlanta at North Point, I think it's called. He's really good, and he's very vulnerable. He shares personal stories. He really does a good job doing that. In the Catholic space, it's a little different because it's really hard to fire a pastor. You got to do something pretty bad to get fired. So it's kind of more of like a monopoly. And I think their preaching is generally not always, because there's really good ones like Father Mike Schmitz, who by the way has the Bible in a Year podcast, who he'll read the whole Bible to you in a year, every 365 days if you sign up for the podcast. Or like Bishop Barron is typically a really strong Catholic preacher. Their motives are more, they do the same kinds of things, but their motivations are less financial and kind of job related and more just trying to get through to people. And most priests don't know this, but Father Mike Schmitz, who's again, now he can go and speak at a stadium and gets 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people to listen. He was not always a good preacher. He had to take it very seriously and read books about what good speaking looked like and really, really work at it to get to where he's at now. And I think most people just don't take the time to do that. And that includes what you're talking about, Randy, which is you got to include the bad stuff. You got to include the drama. If you look at a storyline that's flat is not a story at all. It's boring. The guy walks out of the house, goes to work, makes a good living, has a nice life, comes home. That's just boring. That's not a movie-worthy storyline. Like stories are always like you go to work, something really bad happens, it goes way down, you're almost at the bottom, then okay, resurrection happens, something, you get back and all of a sudden now you're king of the universe or whatever it is. But like there's drama and ups and downs. And I used to, sharing my story, I used to always hide the bad stuff. I didn't want people to know all the lows in my life and my story. And it was actually John who kind of looked at me and was like, dude, you're missing the best stuff. Now I had to get comfortable enough and process that stuff internally where I could share it in a vulnerable way where I wasn't going to break down and cry, or although maybe crying every once in a while wasn't bad, but I needed to kind of get through that and be able to tell it in a way that was both real, which is therefore dramatic. It includes the drama, but also kind of polished enough that it wasn't inappropriate. Let's put it that way. So that's a tough thing to do. And I agree with you that as a salesperson, I think we can do that all the time too. Like, here's all the aspects that are great. Instead of asking what's really going to make an impact, is ask the hard questions. Like, how does this actually make a difference in your life? Are you sure this is really going to help you? Like, is it really worth the money? Like, those are tough questions, and salespeople don't want to generally ask that. And I think as preachers, we don't want to ask those kinds of hard questions either. But it comes across then as kind of flat and boring, and maybe correct theologically. Like, yeah, you didn't scandalize anybody, but you also didn't change anybody's life.
I want to make sure I'm not making an assumption just because I grew up in a Lutheran church where that was the thing. Just again, if I believe that if I would have asked those questions, that I would have been considered controversial and a troubled child and gotten the stink eye. I'm assuming the Catholic Church is the same, because I'm assuming this is more human, like just this is what humans do. Is that true? The three of you that grew up in the Catholic Church?
I think so. But to Anthony's point, I think it was much more the case in the Catholic world. Definitely pre-Vatican II, which was 1965. There was a big shift in the Catholic world then. Before then, it was like all Latin. The Mass was in Latin. It was a very different reality. And I think in that world, it would have been much more frowned upon to ask hard questions like that. Maybe not in every area, but in most, if you went to Catholic school or anything like that. Nowadays, I think that's changing for the better. It's, we won't get into all the ups and downs of Vatican II and whatnot, but even though it's moving in a good direction, I think it's still slow going. I mean, we've given talks to priests where, we just explained what we said earlier about the story, and they're kind of shocked, and they're like, oh, I should tell stories when I'm preaching? It's like, yes. One, there's so many in the Bible. You don't even have to go look for them. They're right there, But that idea of kind of going unpolished and more raw is, I don't know if human nature has changed. I think it's always been this way. Like, people want a good story, but for some reason, there's still a lot of Catholic preachers out there, for sure. That's the world I know the best, that are, trying to make it all polished and sound nice and pretty. And I don't think it lands well. It's maybe correct, but not impactful.
Yeah, it's, when you were talking about the ups and the downs earlier, it's the hero's journey, right? And, when I was writing my book, I wrote the book and then I got into it, and I listened to a podcast because I was trying to become a better writer as I did it, and they were talking about the hero's journey, and I'm like, damn it, I'm not doing this. So I had to go through, kind of rewrite everything with the hero's journey. Then when an editor looked at it, they were like, wait, things are going way too good. We need some, the editor's feedback was, then I had to go rewrite a bunch of stuff to make some more bad stuff happen, or some more trials and tribulations. So it's not natural as a human. Like, that's a skill, just like you were talking about the pastor or the preacher that had to learn to be a good preacher and work on his skills, like that's, being able to communicate that is a skill in itself. So, all right, well, I think let's talk about this. So we're if we're going to market, let's get back into some of the crazy stuff that the church should be marketing. So let's go to Solomon. I didn't know hardly anything about Solomon. And literally, in researching some stuff about Saul and David, it took me down this rabbit hole. And this dude's wild now, too. Had 700 wives, right? This is supposed to be a holy guy. 700 wives, and then better yet, 300 concubines. You do the math. That's 1,000 a year. There's only 365 days. So, anyway. But this is also considered the wisest man who ever lived, right? And by all accounts and foreign dignitaries, etc. Tell me about Solomon. Tell me more about it.
Yeah, so King Solomon is David's son, right? And, David starts to put all the materials together to build the temple. And then Solomon, I think, is the one who actually builds the temple with all those materials that David had, gathered, which probably means conquered, right? Like mostly they weren't just like mining stuff. They were conquering other countries and tribes. And then, the famous story about Solomon is where he is the judge and the two women come in claiming that the baby is theirs. And he says, okay, great, to prove it, or to satisfy the both of you, we'll just cut the baby in half and give you both half. And one woman's like, okay, great. And the other woman's like, no, keep the baby, give it all to her. And he's like, all right, give it to the lady who just gave up the baby, because clearly that's his mother. So he had this wisdom that he was known for. Queens and people came from all around the world to meet him. But I think overall the story, when I read it, is it went to his head. Like all this power, all this wisdom, it went to his head. It says that he started bringing in, instead of worshiping the one true God that they had been told about back from the time of Abraham, he starts to allow his wives and concubines to put their gods, right? They all had their different gods from their background and history, and put them in the palace and worship them. And he was trying to, gosh, it's hard enough to get along with one wife. I can't imagine 1,000, 700 plus all these concubines. It's got to be brutal trying to get them to get along. I suppose that's why you have a harem where they're all kind of separated and have to lock them up, kind of.
That's true for most people, Christian. We know it's not true for you, but this is a public podcast.
She knows we have our struggles. I tell her it's funny. I learned this from somebody else, but we don't really have any marital problems. We have just, what would you call them? Like household problems or like roommate problems, like where she puts her shoes versus mine. But anyway.
Yeah, that would be more complex with 1,000 roommates.
Yeah. What does it mean? The other thing about numbers is always interesting, because the Bible, especially in those times, did not use numbers the way we use numbers. So in today's business mindset, like if you say 1,000 people, we're like, you can go count 1,000 people. Many times in the Bible, numbers are treated more figuratively. And so 7 is a really important number that just means fullness, or like a lot. So 700 might mean, and I'm not saying it does, I'm not discounting there could be 1,000 actual people in his harem, but 7 had a significant, a figurative meaning as well. 40 does as well. So when the Israelites go into the desert for 40 years, or Jesus fasts in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, those are figurative meanings as well. I forgot other ones, but 3, etc. So you also have to look at that aspect of it and try to determine, okay, was it really historical in the strict sense of today's history, or was it things that happened but they were giving their interpretation to it as they recorded it as well?
So with Solomon, there's something, again, as I didn't know this at all. I don't remember magic rings, right? I don't remember Pastor Dave when I was a kid telling me about magic ring to bind demons. So supposedly Solomon used a magic ring to bind demons and conscripted them to build the temple, right? By the way, we finally know how we built the pyramids, but anyway,
There you go.
Somewhat.
That debate has been solved.
Back to Solomon and building this amazing pyramid with demons. Again, how should we take that?
I mean, clearly some more modern authors have used rings and powerful rings to tell some really amazing stories. Yeah, how should we take that? I mean, I think probably, it says he did, so I would think he did, and he was dealing with some, demons, people who I kind of wonder, like, okay, how do you get to that point? Kind of like David, like, how did David get to the point of, having this child with, sleeping with somebody who's not his wife, committing adultery, and then getting the husband killed and all that stuff? Like, it doesn't happen overnight. So how does a king like Solomon, who's supposed to be so wise, given this wisdom by God, right? He asked for it because he said, God asked him, what do you want? Riches or wisdom, kind of. And he's like, I want wisdom. And God said, because you asked well, I'll give you both wisdom and all the riches. But then it clearly goes to his head, and he's starting to do things that are not at all in accord with what he himself, said was important and the laws he had created. So he gets this magical ring. He's, entering into all this kind of magical area, you could call it, demonic stuff. I suppose because he just wasn't happy enough. He didn't have enough. Like, really, dude? You've got all this. How you're the wealthiest, smartest person in the world, and you want more? Like, how is that a thing? And as I think about it right now, it's like maybe it's just that there's like an infinite thirst in man's heart, and no matter how much you have, the stuff isn't going to make you happy.
I
Like,
think that's the lesson. I think that's actually the lesson, that none of us typically want to go back.
yeah,
Yes, we contribute and we give back to our community, but we don't want less tomorrow than we have today. So I think whether this is true or apocryphal or whatever, it's irrelevant. The story is that, the pursuit of riches can bring the things that are not good in your life. That actually, more isn't better. I think that's the lesson here. And so, but it is human nature to want a little bit more, to be a little bit better, be a little healthier, be a little richer, have a bigger family. Whatever that more is for you. So I think that's really the lesson.
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean it's ego, right? I mean, so much of what we've talked about this episode and last episode is just, is man's ego, and and these kings. And if you think about it, if you are the king of everybody, you make all the decisions, you have 1,000 women to choose from, and this, and magic rings, and building this amazing temple, then the ego is the downfall. I mean, again, bringing us back to psychedelics, this is one of the things that's inescapable if you do a large dose of, especially ayahuasca, but mushrooms too. Like, it just wants to break down the ego, and that's where it goes. And it seems like there's a lot of messaging in the Bible to me that aligns with that, and that the ego is a big problem for us that we all
yeah,
struggle with. Even great kings, I guess. That would be my takeaway.
yeah, yeah. It's
I'd like to hijack this. Can I hijack the podcast for a
Oh,
second?
hijack away.
Yeah, I spent some time with family last week, the big family, and a couple of the young couples with young kids are struggling with what to do around faith in worship in church and making a selection. And this is a very diverse family. They're not all raised Catholics. Some are raised in I don't know if they were Hindu or Buddhist and so forth. So there's a wide array. So Christian, how would you counsel someone, a young family, to search for the right community for themselves? What would you say to them?
wow. There's nobody's gonna like my answer because unless it's their answer. But honestly, I think it's a question of I mean, it's a decision making process that is really deeper and more important. So I would call it discernment rather than decision making. It's related, but it's more of a including kind of a more of a spiritual element to it because this is a spiritual process. And so, fact, we told somebody recently, like, hey, this is a big decision, like, and it involves God in some way, shape, or form, however you think of God. You should probably pray to God, like, ask God, or your version of God to show you. I mean, to illuminate you, right? That's a common thing throughout the Bible is asking God for help, and often getting it in the sign of a message that's usually a dream. So even things like that we would think are like that's not wise advice. Don't do whatever showed up in your dreams. It's like, well, maybe not. Look at it and say, is this a message from God? Because God speaks to us in many different ways. So just being open to that, first of all, I think is important. And then as part of that, though, you have to go and start looking at the options. And sometimes it's because you know somebody who you look up to. So you met somebody who's part of a church or community, and you say, hey, I like that person. I like their example, or sometimes it's just if you don't have those kinds of personal connections to kind of follow up and see if that's a good community, a good fit, and a good church, you can look at more of a kind of intellectual approach, which many people take as well. So many times people will go and they start research. I mean, today I think everybody just goes to start Google it and say, okay, what do different churches, well, now AI it, what do different churches say? What do they believe? Do my beliefs align with that belief system? Or close enough to where I want to go and research that. And I know people who've come to our church recently, they did that and they started to go and visit different churches and just went on and knocked on the door and said, hey, I want to speak to the pastor, speak to somebody. And they ended up at our church mostly because the pastor answered them quickly. But then also because they did like what they heard, and their questions were answered in a way that made sense, and that there was enough space for those hard conversations that didn't, were always black and white. So I think there's kind of like the intellectual route, which is important, but also there's the relationship road or pathway, so to speak. And I think both of those are important. And really nobody's going to really change their mind just because of the intellectual side, I don't think. And you mentioned, Anthony, like the community is the bedrock or is the foundational part. And so I think you need both of those. But I would, you just got to start trying it. And it's funny, like I tried for a while to go non-Catholic, and after a while, like it just didn't work. And I never really lost the intellectual part. I always thought like the answers I got in the Catholic Church were right, so to speak. But I definitely left the relationship in the community for a while, and eventually it came back because what I felt was like I can't not be Catholic, and then I found the community that fit with where I was at. And there's lots of different churches, right? There's churches, there's different types of community, there's home churches, there's lots of options. But you mentioned core values earlier, Randy. I would almost challenge people to go back. I think you guys did an episode on that. They go back and look at what do you believe first? If you're just, and I say this because in today's modern world, there's so many options. If you're just out there and have no idea what you believe, maybe that's a good way to start. But it might be helpful just to go and start like, what do I actually believe? And what's my story? And what's my history? And where am I at? And start with that. And then try to go from there so you have some idea of where you're starting rather than just starting with zero, blank slate. I think that's going to be a tough
What
task.
was interesting in the conversation to me was this is a survey of 5 groups of
Yeah.
parents. They were not talking about the church that they weren't doing this for themselves. They
Okay.
were worried about their children not having something,
Mm.
which I found really, I never quite thought of it that way. I've always thought about joining a church because it was good for me, and so, but they were actually, in some cases, nervous about not doing it. What are we going to instill in our kids was kind of
Yeah.
that's not word for word, but there was a bit of a concern that they wouldn't have something. And that may be what's up with the increased Bible sales and the increased attendance in churches and so on and so forth, that, the pendulum swung too far to the left or the right, whichever direction that would be, and now it's swinging back. There's something missing in people's lives. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Community that John always talks about. And we could, by the way, this is a fascinating topic, Anthony. I wish you had brought this up earlier or maybe even on a whole future episode, but we have to wrap this up because we have a hard stop here. I think what's clear to me is that we definitely have a part 5 with Kristian. And in fact, Anthony, the last time we had lunch, you, I, and Kristian, you asked a whole episode's worth of questions, or had a whole episode's worth that. So I would like to see an episode of Anthony questions the next time that we do this, because you act like you didn't have the right questions, but I thought you had fascinating, great questions that we could put together for a whole nother episode. So if you're listening, download, subscribe, tell your friends. Stick around after the break for the abundance briefing. We'll be right back. Thank you, Kristian. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Here at Tales of Abundance, we know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our key 5 F's for lots of us. Taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time-consuming and difficult goals to chase. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable harem. Less than a minute, that's formulated with 75 plus vitamins and nutrients and designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. It even has a few grams of protein that we're all chasing these days. And if you want to try it with our affiliate link, you'll also receive a free AG1 flavor sampler, plus vitamin D3 plus K2 with your welcome kit when you first subscribe, a $72 value. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales.
Listeners, we are back. Abundance briefing. Anthony, there are AI boomerang companies. What do we mean by that? There are a whole bunch of companies that have laid off workers for AI, and now they're hiring them back. The headline I read was Ford was rehiring 350 veteran graybeard engineers after cutting 5,300 salary positions over the last few years. You know, they just found that the AI, they thought they were replacing this, but the AI lacked some of the nuance and the judgment, the institutional knowledge, and some of the things they were needed at Ford. And they've just hired these people back. Same thing's happening. There's a bank in Australia. IBM had 94% of their HR tasks were being done by AI, but now they have actually increased hiring. And there's just a lot of this going on. A lot of companies are hiring people back that they first let off, at least in the name of AI. So what say you?
You know, there's so many contradictions, and this whole AI thing is just in a state of flux. And so, one of the things that I think is going on here is that the quote unquote layoffs or lack of hiring that has been going on has been attributed to AI, but it has nothing to do with AI. It has to do with companies and CEOs wanting to sell themselves to the street that they are investing in this technology, and they want to quote unquote show a ROI on it. And so there's just a lot of knee-jerk reaction going on. The biggest knee-jerk reaction is Jack Dorsey over at Square, who I guess it was January, February, announced the layoff of 50% of his staff, saying he's only going to need half the staff to run that company. And, we'll see, if that turns out to be true, or was it really just the fact that he and that team overhired during COVID, which seems to have been a pretty darn common thing in the tech industry, kind of a harvesting of talent so someone else can get that talent, and now they're cutting back. Elon showed that he could cut his staff by 80% and still run a company for the various reasons with nothing to do with AI. So we'll see. But, the fact is, no one can see the future very clearly in terms of what AI and this, new technologies are going to bring to bear. Where are they going to gain efficiencies for all of these expenditures? Or is it going to be efficiencies, or is it going to be new revenue? So it's a scramble right now, and Wall Street's holding these guys accountable.
How much of it do you think is them trying to make their balance sheet look better for the stock market?
Well, that's exactly what it is. Even if the balance sheet doesn't look better, the story, they're looking for the story. Wall Street invests in tomorrow, not today. So they're buying stories. When Jensen comes out and says, he's cut a deal with, Anthropic for, $8 billion to sell them chips. Those chips aren't going to be manufactured for I mean, literally for years. And then Anthropic announces that, NVIDIA is going to spend, $3 billion on tokens, this circular bullshit that's been going on in terms of revenue. So I think a lot of it is just to prop up their short-term Wall Street gains or prevent losses, because these CEOs have a 90-day window. No one's thinking like Jensen thought back in 2008, 2009, when he was a video game guy, and he recognized that that wasn't going to do it for him, so he moved into other things. And if people read history, they told him he was an idiot. This is a big mistake. You're gonna sink this company. And sure enough, he was right. They were wrong, and that there's going to be plenty of that here. So I just don't know who's going to be
And
right
how
or
much
wrong.
do you think is a CYA, right? Like, how many of these people hired bad and now they're laying those same people off and saying, "Oh, it's AI."
Yeah, exactly. I think, I'm not saying it's 100% of them, but underlying, there's always dirt underlying this activity. I mean, I lived in this world. I mean, I worked for a company that it's out of business now, but I would get a phone call, at the beginning of a quarter, and I'd get an assignment. You got to produce 10%, 10 cents of earnings per share. Now, I was running a business that both generated revenue and had a significant overhead expense. So we had to do the calculations. Are we going to get 6 cents from additional revenue and 4 cents from cost cutting? But that was the assignment. Go get, and this went around the entire building. This is a $40 billion company, and everyone got their assignment of, you got to get X percent improvement in EPS this quarter. Now that created, knee-jerk reactions all over the building, because there's only two ways to do it. You raise the bridge of revenue, or you lower the water of cost. So, and then the following quarter could be a different assignment. You got to increase EPS by revenue growth only. Don't cut expenses. It's just crazy. So
I think those things are definitely factors. I would say the other thing that's going on here that ties into that is it's marketing. It's similar to Henry Ford back in the day when he was paying employees $5 an hour, which doesn't seem like much, but if you think about it, that with the money was priced in gold. What's that?
$5 a day.
A day. Sorry. Yes. Thank you. $5 a day doesn't seem like much, but money was priced in gold. That was a quarter ounce of gold, right? So now to make a quarter ounce of gold, that would be $1,000 a week, right? So it's not great, but it's, more than it sounds like. Anyway, when the media asked him about it, he said, well, I want my people to be able to afford the cars, to buy the cars that they're making. That was complete BS. The reason he went up to $5 a day is because he was forced to, I believe, the unions and the negotiations, and there was a big strike, and he only did it out of negotiation because he had to, not because he wanted to. But what's carried on throughout the generations is, oh, look at what a good guy Henry Ford was. He wanted to pay his employees a fair wage when he just wanted to pay them as little as possible, but he turned it into a marketing message, very wisely so. But we got to be careful. What people do and what they say are often two different things. And the other thing I think that's going on from my own use in AI, I feel really confident in this. Well, I feel confident in the marketing thing too. But I think a lot of these companies probably did lay people off, and they didn't know how to use AI when they did it. They just heard the marketing of AI. Oh my God, you're going to be able to do this and you can replace this. Or they talked to somebody in another company and this is what they were working on. And they thought, by God, I'm going to do that too. And then they didn't know how to execute well enough to actually do it. And now they're having to hire those people back. I will tell you though, with recent things like Fable 5 in Claude, I've been blown away by what it can do. My experience is I replaced a guy that retired and did it with a lot of automation. Not everything he did, but a lot of things. But now I'm creating new products and new opportunities that I think if people are really utilizing AI, I'm looking for more people that can help me execute on these and partner with. I think it will actually create jobs if people are really using it properly. So,
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, as I said, you're discovering things every day, every single shit, multiple times a day of what you can and can't do, and it's creating abundant opportunities for you, business opportunities, savings, product development, and so on and so forth. That's where we are with this. No one has a clear line of sight. I always use the analogy. This is like looking for a result on the other side of a fish tank. You can kind of see what's over there, but it's blurry, and you can't clearly define exactly what it is. So yeah, let's wait and see. But a lot going
yeah,
on here.
yeah, I mean, I've got a product I've developed in the last few days that I've been wanting to develop for 15 years. It's a problem I've wanted to solve. I'm not quite ready to share it yet, but it is like, I wouldn't have been able to do it literally a week ago before with Opus 4.8 on Claude. I couldn't do it with 5.0. It's running in the background as we speak. It's already a working prototype and beyond better than the competition now. And I'm not even done with it. So anyway, next topic, but that's the type of opportunity that I think will be created, and that creates more bodies, not less. So, all right, our second topic. America has become a millionaire machine. I think this is pretty cool. The U.S. added 441,078 new millionaires in 2025 alone. That's over 1,200 a day. And basically half of the world's millionaires last year were created in America. We now have about 9 million millionaires. Now, I would argue a millionaire isn't what it used to be, and it doesn't buy what it used to be, certainly when we were kids. The other side of that, though, is, as we've talked about in recent episodes, Gen Z has a hiring freeze. They are getting unemployment, youth unemployment, 16 to 24, hit 10.8% last about a year ago this time. These numbers are July of 25, but that was up from 9.8 the year before. So, two different sides of the same coin. What's your take on this?
Well, you know, on the first topic on the millionaires, I'm sure a lot of it's driven by the stock market, and those that are in the stock market, their portfolios, grew, during the last couple of years. So that's great. I think that's fine. And a million is a million. It's a starting point. And if those people stay in the market and keep their jobs, that million will become 2 million, and they'll be all set for, the day they decide that they're going to retire and move out of the workforce. As far as the youth unemployment, I want to study that some more, because my understanding is that there are significant job openings that aren't being filled. And I don't understand why. Are they, where are these jobs? Now, I know there's a lot of job growth has been going on in the healthcare sector. So those are professional jobs requiring a certain type of education and training. So, okay, so let's put those aside. But there are also, my understanding, a lot of service jobs that are open. There are a lot of manufacturing jobs that are open. There are a lot of I know personally that there are a lot of construction jobs, swinging hammers and, lugging lumber and things like that. So why are those younger getting started people, Gen Z, why are they not filling the available roles? Is it because they don't want those jobs? They want a cushy job in an office with the man? I think that's, a fool's errand. But yeah, I don't understand this, because as I said, there are hundreds of thousands of job openings in this country. Now, maybe they're in places where so just use a silly example. Maybe they're not in New York City, and 10% of the 10% are in New York City. Maybe they're in Kansas City instead of New York City. So I don't know. I want to study this a little bit more, try to understand how to solve this problem.
I think what I'm seeing with a few young people that I've been interacting with is it's the type of job, and you mentioned that, right? Like there's entry level jobs, and they don't want them. they're like, well, I got a degree in this, and therefore I should be able to work in this, or they want a certain type of job, and they're not getting it. And I think that is I think that is probably one of the bigger disconnects there. But you could be right. It could be part of the country. I can only speak to Austin. I know in Austin and the surrounding area, it isn't that hard to get a job. But I do know a lot of college kids, because I have a kid that age getting out of school, and he's continuing his college job. But my son's having a hard time finding a job right now. But again,
Well,
he's looking in very specific industries instead of getting a starter job and working his way up.
I just asked our dear friend Chat how many job openings are there in the USA, and you're going to be blown away by this. According to Chat, so let's put that in quotes, 7.6 million job openings right now in the United States as of May 26. Okay. 0.5 in professional and business services, 1.4 in healthcare, 1.2 in trade, transportation, and utilities, 1 million in leisure. And then it drops from there. And you're going to not like this one. There are 800,000 job openings in government. So there are retail trade, 700,000. I'm rounding up the numbers. Manufacturing, 600 to 500,000. Construction, I said that earlier, 300,000. So there are jobs out there. And to your point, that maybe people, I would say professional and business services, maybe not qualified for, health and social assistance, maybe not qualified for, but all these others, these are all, with rare exception, there are entry-level jobs in all of these things, certainly in the retail trade. So I don't get it.
Well, I just think that this is the greatest time of opportunity ever, and the K-shaped economy is cool, is cool, is real, and people are going to have to adjust, and they gotta chase the abundance and chase the opportunity, and sometimes that's going to mean starting out waiting tables and working their way up from there. So
I don't know.
let's move.
I want to call bull on the K-shaped economy real quick, because it's always been a K-shaped economy to some extent, right? There's always
Anthony, the numbers don't. It's
no,
there's more people. There's a lot of young people, and a lot of there's a lot of people that can't afford a ribeye right now, or they can't have. You told me a story the other day. You were going to get lamb chops.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I get it. I'm not saying
their story. Tell people the lamb chop story.
it was $62 for 6 lamb chops, and I said no, I'll just get the burger.
Right, and you can afford it, right? But
Right.
imagine the person making 40 grand a year. I mean, there really was a message that kids have been not just told, it has been pushed down their throats of, hey, go to school, get good grades, you'll get into a good college, which, by the way, has become hyper competitive and harder and harder and harder. They do everything right, and they still can't get into the colleges they want to. Then you're going to get this degree, work hard there, and you'll go out and you'll get a job and you'll make lots of money. And that is becoming harder and harder. And wages, even kids getting out of school now versus a couple of years ago, starting salaries have gone down. Now, it doesn't mean they can't work their way up. We just got done talking about that. I think there's people that they expect shit to be given to them because they did that, and they're not, and there's a disservice that they're not working for it. But it is also harder. I really
I'm
believe
I'm
that.
gonna table the discussion and say that we're gonna do a full episode on this, because I have a completely different view of it.
Okay.
So
All right.
not for today, for maybe
All
next
right.
week.
Send boomerang to Anthony Marino all right. Okay. All right. Let's go on to another story that has you worked up. The Palantir CEO, Alex Karp, recently went on TV, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. So tell people what he said, and then.
Well, let's talk about who he is and what Karp is the CEO of Palantir. He got his start in Silicon Valley in multiple startups. I think he's actually part of the original PayPal gang that all became billionaires years ago. He had something to do with Meta and so forth. His company, Palantir, for a lot of years was just a small little security company that was, helping to secure data for, big companies and the government and so forth. And in the last 4 or 5 years has really blown up. Cybersecurity is, probably one of the fastest growing and most important industries. So he's got his finger on the pulse, and he also has a vested interest in his business, which is which drives some of what he was talking about. But the main thrust of what he was talking about was the frontier models represent the danger to their customers, and from the aspect of when a company uses Anthropic or Chat GPT or all these other tools that are out there, Perplexity and what have you, they're allowing their what he calls their alpha, their source code, if you will,
Their data, their data and their institutional knowledge.
Institutional knowledge. That's a better term, to be uploaded to a cloud that can be used anywhere in the world. Now, these frontier models, Chat and Anthropic, got their start by basically hoovering up all the free information that was out there, books, letters, information, healthcare, you name it. So they gathered all this information up for free and now have created trillion-dollar companies out of that. And he fears the same thing's going to happen with the institutional knowledge of a GE or a IBM or you name the company, Salesforce, and his fundamental outcome, he believes, is going to be these frontier models are going to attack the application layer, meaning they're gonna be selling products, not just information. So they may, let's say, they develop their own legal application. If you're a lawyer and there's going to be an application for creating a brief or filing a lawsuit and so on and so forth. The example he gave going back to the 80s was Microsoft. There used to be two companies called Lotus 1-2-3, which was a version of Excel, and WordPerfect, which was a version of Word. Microsoft used to have that in those two companies, paid those two companies to put their application on its, Microsoft Office product, and then proceeded to replicate those two things in their own name, stole all the intellectual property, and created Excel and created Word, and who knows anything about Lotus 1-2-3 or WordPerfect today. So he's given real life examples of that, and I think that, I don't know what the economic impact of that is on Anthropic or Chat, but it gives me pause, because I don't think they can survive and grow trillion-dollar companies without the applications.
So let me jump in.
Because of the okay.
Let me jump in here. So I think about things a lot of times from game theory and what's the consequences downstream. So let's go from not now, but these companies, if we go back a little bit into the recent past, they spend all this money developing data centers and training, and they've raised money on these gigantic valuations. They're talking about trillion-dollar valuations for OpenAI and Claude both when they go public. Well, investors want a return. Like, investors don't want to throw $1 trillion at this, or really billions at this, and get nothing. And it's moving toward open source, which is one of the things he's talking about, which we'll circle back to. But you can't charge, if an open source model gets really big, you can't charge a huge amount every month, because people are going to start moving. I have moved stuff to open source because I didn't need the more powerful machine, because token expense goes up. Well, how are they going to get that money back? Especially, by the way, when you build a data center, that thing doesn't run for 25 years. You have to constantly be replacing chips and computers, and that stuff, computer technology wears out. So they don't just have to get back their initial investment, they got to get the ongoing investment back. Well, you use the example of a law firm. I don't know what verticals, it doesn't matter if they go after office work, accounting, law, but they are almost forced to say, okay, how do we get these billions or trillions that we've invested back? We are hemorrhaging money, so let's go after this industry.
Right.
And if they hoover up all your data, and if you have an accounting firm and they start taking yours and everybody what they do with accounting, you're just teaching them how to put you out of business. So it kind of forces people on top of the token cost, is what he's saying, to go to an open source model, right? Which is where he ultimately ended up.
The more recent example, and you were part of this, is back at the turn of the century, in 2000. I remember how difficult it was to get a URL, to set up a website, to get it registered, and then figure out how to program it to do what you needed to do. And then along comes GoDaddy and LegalZoom.com and these companies that made it so easy to create a company, get a URL, hell, build the website. They had templates for building websites, and they became these giant companies, and all the individuals, the consultants and the individuals that were doing this work got pushed to the side. You know what I mean? You didn't go to Jack in the corner or in his mother's basement and ask him to do it for you. Now it got hoovered up in these big companies. And that's what he's talking about. That's exactly the thing. Now, when you think about growth of a company, it doesn't matter what the company is. As we said earlier, the investors are looking at, what are you going to do tomorrow? All right, so you got $1 billion business now. You got this run rate of revenue, terrific. How are you going to justify a 30 multiple on your revenue next year? Because I'm investing in you for tomorrow, not for today. And the only way to do that is to grow the business. The only way to grow the business is to either win by breathing, as we used to say. You just get more customers doing the same thing like Meta did for so many years. That's stalled out now. They've kind of reached critical mass there for sure. So, yeah, he's striking fear into it. And you mentioned open source. Open source is going to be a problem for these guys, because open source can do a lot of stuff. Call it the mundane tasks of the day if you want, but not so mundane. They're getting closer and closer to just as good as the other guys. So, and you mentioned expenses. Imagine the expense of paying these engineers to improve the model. I mean, we've heard unbelievable stories about how much they're paying these folks. So anyway, it's something to look at. And as we said earlier, who the hell knows what's going to really happen here down the road?
Well, to be clear, if you have a business, open source in a lot of ways is a solution, because that's what helps you keep your sandbox and protect your intellectual property. I mean, I've already had an example where Facebook Meta, we had a conversation bot that was excellent, way better than the one they had. They first made it where ours would no longer work with their site. And then within a couple of days, their bot was speaking exactly like our bot and had clearly ripped off what we were doing. It's just there's a 0% chance it was a coincidence. They were using our terminology, our phrasing, things that were pretty unique. I would say incredibly unique to our company. So, I use a Chinese open source model, DeepSeek, and I don't have problems, as best I can tell, with them stealing my data. And I did with Facebook or Meta stealing my data. So,
we haven't talked about it, but in order to protect your data and keep it in-house, what does this mean to cloud computing? Everyone ran to the cloud, put your data in the cloud, right? Are people going to, and I think he mentioned this in the discussion, that, this could be a boom for servers, server architecture. The data room might have a revival where people, buy the equipment they need to house all of their data and other data that they bring in to keep it in-house and to protect it. So I don't know. I don't know if that's true. If that's a hypothesis that I have. We'll see.
I would say with game theory, that's absolutely true, right? I've even seen that myself, right? I was more the computer that my agent runs on. I was more concerned about hard drive space than I have been on any computer in a long, long time. Let's wrap it up there. Everybody, thank you for spending time with us this week. And until next week, go out and spread a little abundance.
Take care, everybody.